Perhaps the only forms of action appropriate to the angry people are violent. Perhaps a small minority, by setting ablaze New York and Washington, could damage this country forever in the court of world opinion. Urban guerrillas are the only realistic alternative at this time to electoral politics or massed armed resistance. The political left today, and the majority of leftist politicians in Washington, are blaming the right for violent rhetoric that they claim is going to bring about violence to them and possibly violence to our country. And yet the history of violence here in the United States on the political side of things comes from the left side of the political spectrum. The opening quotation that I gave isn't from some rightist politician, but it was from Tom Hayden, who was a 60s radical, eventually ended up marrying Jane Fonda, and served some time in the California legislature. Again, you go from the Union forces in, say, around 1870 throughout the 1960s and the early part of the 1970s, you will find that the rhetoric and the actions of the political left are the violent streak. And there's so much material on this, it would be hard for me to cover it in this very short program. But if you listen to the left, today, they talk about the anger of those on the right and how that anger is going to spill over into violence. And yet in the 1994 midterm election, angry Americans took their frustrations out at the ballot box. And after liberal losses, liberal pundits grudgingly credited or blamed conservative talk radio for creating a voters' revolution. There was no violence. The conservative side of the political spectrum were angry. Yes, they are. They're very angry today. But they took it out at the ballot box. It's interesting that the Tea Party movement isn't violent at all. It's a wide spectrum of people of all different ages, and yes, of course, what does the left do? It says, well, there aren't enough blacks involved in it, and so it doesn't have this diversity side of things. And yet, when you look at Democrat elections, you'll find more than 90% of blacks vote for the Democrats. Where is the diversity within the black community? This is always a one-sided discussion when it comes to politics. And a similar blame game tactic was tried by South Dakota Democrat Senator Tom Daschle after he lost the Senate to the Republicans in 2002 midterm elections. He blamed their losses on talk radio listeners who want to act in ways that would threaten those in public life. Editorial writers compared American fundamentalist Christians to Islamic extremists. Daschle and other critics offered no empirical evidence to back up their claims. The only empirical evidence they had was the fact that the Democrats lost at the polls. And Dick Williams, a columnist here in the Atlanta area, observed, if U.S. senators and their families have been threatened with violence, the press and the police have kept it a secret. This is the same thing that took place last week, where the claim is that racial epithets and anti-homosexual remarks were made to a group of congressmen and senators passing through a group of protesters. And they made all this rhetoric, and yet there was a videotape that showed that nothing of a racial epithet was ever delivered. And I believe Andrew Breitbart says, look, if anybody can come up with any film of any evidence of this type of rhetoric at these congressmen, he'll give them $10,000. Of course, nothing has been forthcoming. And of course, nothing is being said in the media over this. But the history of this is really quite striking. Using violence to bring about societal and cultural change has been a standard tool of the political left. Power grows out of a barrel of a gun is a slogan adopted by leftist revolutionaries. Carl Oglesby, president of the ultra-leftist Students for a Democratic Society, this was a society that was prominent in the 1960s, said, revolutions do not take place in velvet boxes. Nuns will be raped and bureaucrats will be disemboweled. And where did he give this speech? It was at the Washington Peace March in 1965. And so everybody has short memories about all of this. I remember being on campus at Western Michigan University, when National Guardsmen had to be brought in to keep violence from spilling over after the Kent State shootings in May of 1970. And of course, this was brought about because there were riots on campus and the burning of various buildings on campus by the left. Now, of course, the National Guard reacted in a very inappropriate way. They weren't trained for any of this, but what precipitated the whole thing was the violence of the left. The counterculture decade of the 1960s was described as the decade of anger and rebellion. What is the people on the right being accused of today? Anger. And how did they express this anger? Sit-ins led to explosions when anti-war activists planted a fertilizer and fuel oil bomb at Sterling Hall, home of the University of Wisconsin's physics department and the Army Math Research Center. Student protesters had set fire to an ROTC building and thrown bottles at police. This was at Kent State University in May of 1970. So again, this history goes on and on and on. The labor movement, I don't have time to go through all of this, but as it entered the industrial age full blast in the 1870s, America had plunged into the bloodiest and most violent labor history of any industrial nation in the world. Under the auspices of the First Education and Defense Society, workers met regularly and drilled with firearms. In May 1886, during a labor rally in Chicago's Haymarket Square, anarchists had thrown a bomb into police ranks, killing 7 policemen and injuring 70 more. At the trial for the anarchist leaders, the following treatise written by a Johann Most was put into evidence. And listen to the title of this: Science of Revolutionary War for Instruction in the Use and Preparation of Nitroglycerin, Dynamite, Gun Cotton, Fulminated Mercury, Bombs, Fuses, Poisons, and so forth. It just goes on and on and on with this. In 1912, because of a dispute over unionization, the Los Angeles Times building was dynamited and 21 persons killed. 16 packets of bombs were found in the New York post office in April 1919. This is the labor movement. Now, the labor movement today has gotten much more sophisticated, but in reality, it still uses strong-arm tactics. In June 1919, bombs damaged the houses of the U.S. Attorney General, the mayor of Cleveland, and judges in New York and Boston. September 1920, a group of anti-capitalist anarchists set off a bomb on Wall Street, killing 38 people. So, tomorrow I want to deal with one of the biggest radicals of the 1960s on the left side of the political spectrum, Abbie Hoffman, and look at some of his books. And because our press today, the media today, fail to bring this history in, fail to show where true violence and true violent rhetoric comes from, the American people are lulled into this sense that this is all from the right. Conservatives want to change things from the bottom up. Conservatives want to change things through talk radio. That is, through free speech, through the First Amendment to the Constitution. They believe that the way you change things is at the ballot box. And of course, we here at American Vision believe you change things in terms of self-government, family government, church government, and civil government. None of it by violence, simply by applying the Bible to every area of life. It's the political left that has used the rhetoric of violence. It's the political left that has used violence. They finally got even smarter in the 1970s and began to take over every aspect of society. They took over the courts, they took over the educational establishment, and they took over the area of politics. They don't need to use violence anymore. They simply use the rhetoric of violence against conservatives in order to get their way.
For more related to this topic, check out God and Government, a biblical and historical study. You will find it at AmericanVision.com.